So I will begin with a land acknowledgement. Um, I am in Guelph physically right now, presenting from here. I recognize that you are all over the place, hopefully many in Guelph, but within our region. Guelph sits on lands that were and remain traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the Credit Anishinaabe peoples, Six Nations of the Grand River Haudenosaunee people, and also the Sogain Ojibwe Nation people. And they've cared for this land, the water, the life forms here since time immemorial. This area is also included in Treaty 3, and it's part of the Dish with One Spoon and the Two-Row Wampum Covenants, all of which bestow rights and responsibilities and obligations upon everyone who is here. And it's a home today to the families of settlers like mine, immigrants, newcomers, and continues to be the home to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples from across Turtle Island and the world. We're at an equity presentation, and I'm white, a settler, probably like many of you. And with my family, I've been on a journey to learn more about my family's complicated relationships with First Nations people and the land in which we share. I acknowledge and as I learn, there are times when people in my family have done some pretty horrible things to people, to others, um, and harms that continue. Colonialism and racism have affected many parts of our world, and the wounds it's done to Indigenous people and non-white people are great and profound. They do wounds to white people. Everybody, really, all of us are harmed by what's happened. I'm not responsible for causing those harms. I'm not responsible of the problems of the past, and I'm not holding guilt or shame for things that my family may have done. But I am responsible for the choices to either uphold or to dismantle those harms, and for the kind of ancestor that I want to be for future generations. And so this morning, I invite each of you to think about our awareness of our relationships to those who've gone before us, to those who are around us, with us now, and those who are going to come after us to be a guide for our collective work to help be better ancestors for future generations. And I affirm my own commitment to trying to do that. Thank you. And with that, I'm going to invite you to join me in a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Lord, give us new strength so we can build places of belonging, a community for all to share their gifts, where each knows that they are loved, valued, and needed. Help us to see the light of Christ in all that we serve, and be courageous in fighting for justice. Let us remember that each of us is loved, each of us is willed, and each of us is necessary. May we balance mercy and justice so that we can achieve equity and access for all of your children. We ask this in your name. St. Catherine Drexel, pray for us. St. Martin de Poires, pray for us. St. Patrick, pray for us. Amen. The Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you, Jeff. All right, so good morning, everyone. Just before we start, we like to start with our four agreements with our presentation. So our four agreements, they basically state, stay engaged, even if you don't agree with what is being said, recognize the risk in this type of work and resist disengaging. Presume the best intentions of those around you and be open to expect unexpected insights. We ask that you be okay with discomfort. We understand that unlearning can be harder than new learning. Most of us have, when we've been doing things a certain way for so long, it's hard and challenging when someone comes and says, you need to do it differently. So we understand that, and we know that that's going to be uncomfortable, but we ask that you be okay with it. We also know that with being uncomfortable comes change. So we want you to welcome that discomfort, sit in it, and process it, and we can process it together. Speak your truth. In this, when you're talking about topics like this, we know that it's on a continuum, and we're all on different places on this continuum of learning. So speak your truth for you, where you're at in your learning. We like this to be a safe space, no judgment, because as you'll learn in the presentation, some of us, we've been immersed in this because we live in the society that we live in and in the world that we live in. That is what we've been taught, and that is what we are immersed in. So speak your truth where you are. Accept non-closure. We're not going to end racism today. I always joke, I don't think we're going to end it in my lifetime, but I hope by the time it comes to my kids and their kids, we're somewhere with it. So things won't get resolved today. Um, some things are going to sit uncomfortably with you. Take it away. And like I said, process it and be open to new ways of looking at things. And these four agreements come from, they're adapted from Courageous Conversations About Race by Glenn Singleton. Next slide. All right, on language. So language is always changing. If you are, I know that some of you are new to education, but if you've been in education for a while, you know that language is always changing. So on language, we always say this is the best we know now. We might finish this presentation and next week something might change, but this is what we know now with language and what is being used. So BIPOC, some of you might have heard, which means Black, Indigenous, or people of color. Also, the most current practice that we are hearing right now is racialized. Coming from our OHRC, a little backstory about racialized is that the term emphasizes race as an external judgment. So it also implies that whiteness is not a racial identity and only something non-white people have. So that's kind of, we could go deeper into that, but that's kind of what it is. So the other term is racialized. So what we say on language is be as specific as possible. So for example, I am Black, but I'm African. I'm from Nigeria. So if you happen to know me and you know that I'm Nigerian, say Nigerian. If you don't know me, but you see that I'm Black, just say Black. And it's okay to say Black. And I always joke about that because I know it's always like people are not sure. It's okay to say Black, 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 Black. It's fine. People that are Black know that they're Black. So don't be afraid to say, oh, I'm referring to a Black student. If you don't know, um, like I said, their ethnicity or their background, it's okay to say Black. But if you do know, then be as specific as possible. Um, it's important to know that there's no such thing as a monolith. So what that means is I'm a Black African Canadian woman, but I don't speak for all Black African Canadian women. I can only speak for me and my experiences and the experiences of my community and the people that I know or my friends that are Black women. So there's no one person that can speak for every race or speak to everyone's experience. So that's what we mean by there's no such thing as a monolith. Communities versus community. So that's just emphasizing that there are different communities within a community. For example, if you look at our indigenous folks within those communities, that community, they're different communities. So again, recognizing that, for example, First Nations are different from Inuit, Inuits are different from Métis. So just recognizing that not every indigenous community has different communities. Um, Multilingual learners. So this is fairly new in the last couple of years. It's what we used to call ESL, English Second Language. So now they're asking that we use multilingual learners. Again, just acknowledging that they had a language before English, and English is not the sort of superior language, which is kind of what what was felt that ESL was referring. So now we say our multilingual learners because they already had other languages before coming to Canada and then having to learn English. Any questions on that? Jeff, did you talk about how we're going to do questions?
I did not.
Okay.
So there will be a form at the end for questions. So this is a little bit new for Mary and I. This is actually our first time recording this presentation. We've done it many times. And usually we don't record it because we want you to feel like, okay, can I ask this question without the whole world knowing that this is the question I asked? And so you are welcome to ask questions in this. periodically we'll say in other questions, we'll ask you to unmute so other people can hear your question if you wish. There will at the end be a form to give us a little bit of feedback, but also to allow you to ask questions. And on that form, it's anonymous. So if you wish us to reply to you directly and say, hey, this is, Jeff's question, and you get back to us, well, there'll be a spot for you to say, hey, my name is Jeff. But otherwise, if you just have a question and you want us to get back to you, probably what we're planning on doing is kind of putting together like a summary of here's some questions we received and here's some replies from Mary and I in response. And we'll make sure that Ms. Miller is able to email that out to you. But if there is a question along the way right now, I'm going to ask you not to use the chat only because just the way it's set up, I can't see the chat. But if you wish to mute and ask a question of Mary, please do.
Okay,
All
I
right,
think it's over to you, Jeff.
sure. So continuing with language a little bit, just I recognize that a number of you might be familiar or seen something like LGBT or LGBTQ or 2S LGBTQIA plus and various acronyms. And so just for awareness as we go, I'll kind of define these terms very briefly. This is not going to be enough to kind of do a deep dive into anything, but just an overview. The 2S refers to Two Spirit. This is a First Nations phrase and term that refers to a variety of things, but basically, in this essence, it is people who feel that they have both a male and a female spirit within them. Lesbian is female women who are sexually attracted to women. Gay is a broad term. It can mean male, female, any range of things. It often tends to refer to uh, basically the whole spectrum of 2S plus, but it also tends to refer to males who sexually prefer males. Bisexual refers to people who tend to, on a varying spectrum or a variety of things, be attracted to both genders. Transgender is a term that has, well, it has a, it's often in the news as contentious, but really it refers to somebody who, in practice or in in how they're feeling about themselves, their understanding of who they are is different from the biology that they have, they have, and so that's really what we refer to there. Queer and questioning, two separate words. Questioning basically means like I don't really know. I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to figure it out. This is a not uncommon element. It can be transitory. It could just be, a sense of identity for people. Queer is a term that over time became a very hurtful pejorative. It has since been reclaimed by many in the 2S plus community. It is officially the name for queer studies. It has a place to be used. So if you were studying queer studies or queer theology or queer sociology and so on, but it is not a word that generally speaking gets used just casually because it does have it still has a lot of pejorative terms to it. Intersex refers to people, and there's a small percentage, but it's a real percentage of people who are born with either physical characteristics of both genders or people who are born with basically not clear where they are in terms of gender. There were other terms that have been used in the past to describe people who we now call intersex. Intersex is the preferred term. Asexual refers to people who just don't feel a strong sexual identity or they don't feel a sexual attraction to people in general. They may be romantically attracted to people emotionally, but they're not feeling it physically. The diagram to the right was developed by a person named Sam Killerman called the genderbread person to help explain this, because this is something that for outside of the 2S LGBTQIA plus community is something that often is a bit challenging to understand or get around, which is really the idea that when we talk about someone being male or female or their sex or their sexual orientation or their identity, there's a lot of pieces to it. The first part is your identity. That's your sense of self. So I consider myself male. I think of myself as a man. That's my identity. The expression is how I dress in relation to my society. So I tend to dress the way that society expects men to dress. I may think of myself as a man and dress in a way that our society does not consider to be male. That's where my expression is different from my identity, but they are separate things. And just because I dress male or female, it does not necessarily relate to how I think about myself. For most of us, it does, not for everyone. Sex is the biological gender, right? So whether or not you have male sexual characteristics or female sexual characteristics, or if you're intersex and you have maybe both or not really developed of either. Attraction is who you were primarily drawn to in a sexual orientation sort of way. So the acronym 2SLGBTQIA+, which I recognize as a mouthful, is actually the one that our students and our board have asked us to use most consistently. And it refers to a lot of things, but just to be clear, so say it again, not enough to get into a deep dive. Our sense of identity, who I am, is not the same as my expression of how I dress, and that's not the same as my sexual orientation, which is who I'm attracted to. They do often, for many of us, align in conventional ways, but not for everybody. And that's true for our students. And that relates to pronouns, which is often a hot topic for a lot of people. So first and foremost, just a matter of respect and politeness, use the pronouns that people ask you to use for them. If someone asks you to address them as Mr. So-and-so or Dr. So-and-so, that's how you address them. It is actually a matter of human rights and dignity, and it's rooted in the Ontario Human Rights Code. It's considered discrimination against gender and gender expression to intentionally misgender a person. So someone looks at me, sees that I'm male, they see me and they say, oh, Jeff looks like a man. I'm going to call him a he, and so on. And I'm like, actually, my pronouns are different. That's an accident. That happens. Like, you correct it. But if after I say, no, I would prefer to use she and her pronouns, and someone chooses to continuously say, no, you're a he, I'm going to call you a he, that's a problem. Accidental, I didn't know, I'm sorry I made an assumption, try not to. But when you're intentionally misgendering a person, that's actually considered a form of discrimination, and it will cause problems. It's also hurtful. When you're in doubt, you're not sure, you can avoid pronouns entirely. You just refer to kids, kiddos. You can talk about people, use their first name. You can use they as a pronoun for a singular person. And we do that all the time, right? Does anyone know where they are? They dropped the package off at my house. That actually has a quite old history. It goes back at least to the 14th century of using they as a singular pronoun. I know that there are a lot of people say, well, that's grammatically incorrect. The grammatical tightness around that is actually fairly recent in the history of English language, and it does change a lot. Those of you who taught English, the number of times we use thee and thou, which we don't use anymore, or thy. Pronouns do change. And so we're in a place right now where pronouns are becoming much more expansive and reflective of what people are asking of us. And I'll pause there for a second. I know it's a lot and it's quick, but is there any questions? Okay. And actually, a quick question. I'm just going to ask for Deb. Is everyone still able to see the presentation, the PowerPoint presentation?
They should be able to. I see it.
Okay.
And I am, just as a quick little thing here, I am just creating a link and I'll put it in the chat for the documents. There's some people that are unable to access the documents that I sent out before. So just give me a moment and I will put a link for that in the group chat for those of you that are asking about that.
Okay, thank you. So why are we doing this presentation at all? This isn't about anyone in this conversation or anyone in particular being racist or anything else. If anything, it's because we're not racist and we know you're not racist and we want to address things and to help us work through really difficult stuff because the reality is racism exists. We live in a world that has racism, that has racists, that has been shaped largely, not largely, but definitely heavily influenced by people with racist ideas. And it's a factor. And as we, you know, grow and get better, we're recognizing like this is not something that we can just passively assume is going to go away. We have to address things directly. 2 years ago in March, there was a report from the Parents of Black Children, which is an Ontario-based advocacy group, literally exactly what the name says, of parents of Black children, uh, talking about what their experiences were like in Ontario. Almost 60% of those families said not only did they have problems, but they had problems that they were even trying to raise with the school board. 50% replied that they said that their children experienced anti-Black racism at school. 14% said it had elevated to the level of direct bullying. And what they were looking at, they said, is there was a lot of anti-Black comments and actions by staff and students, that there's racialized bullying was not being appropriately dealt with. So kids were calling each other things, and the teacher was like, well, you know, it's who's to say, and so on. That there were anti-Black classroom activities and assignments. So these are examples like give the economic justifications for slavery, for example. Anytime you're trying to give a justification for something that's blatantly wrong, we have a problem. That they found that Black students were being held to a higher standard of behavior and often were punished more severely. So what that looks like is uh, my son, white, um, gets angry, shoves another kid, and it's like, hey, you're roughhousing, calm that down. A Black student shoves another kid, and it's like, you need to go to the office. You're being really aggressive and violent. It's the same action, but they're not treated equally. Another area that they found was a consistent pattern was low academic expectations. So that includes streaming Black students in a general rule into easier programs. So grade 8 going into grade 9, white student is say getting 60, 70 mark, and they say, well, why don't you go into academics because it keeps your options open and we'll see how it goes. Non-white students, 60, 70 marks. Well, why don't you go into the applied or the open streams? You'll do better. You'll get a higher mark, and leaving out the fact that that's going to affect your outcome. And in fact, it's going to be harder for you to get to university. And as a broad spectrum, in fact, it can cause catastrophic harms to a whole community. There was also in March 2022 a report from the University of Western Ontario and the local immigration partnership called Discrimination Experienced by Immigrants, Visible Minorities, and Indigenous Peoples in Wellington County. I'm using the Wellington County one here. There was also one specifically about Guelph. The numbers are similar, not exactly the same, but similar. In that, they found 90% of Indigenous people in Wellington County and 65% of immigrants and visible minorities reported experiencing discrimination in the previous 3 years. This is in our area. 31% of visible minorities said that this discrimination happened at school or in classes. And if you're Indigenous, it was actually over 55%, so that they were really directly encountering hostility and problems because of who they were. Guelph has the third highest annual rate of police-reported hate crime in Ontario. 2017, 2018, 2020. It was the fourth highest in 2016 and 2019. Now, that doesn't mean we have the most number of hate crimes in the country or anything like that, but for our size and for the number of people who report to the police, we're in the top 3 or 4. The number has dropped a little bit, the last record, but I haven't seen the final stats, so I haven't updated it, but I need to. But this is the report that was in the University of Western Ontario report. That's just the police reported. That means that they went to the police and the police agreed that this was a hate crime. This is not a problem for some other city or a bigger place like Toronto or Windsor or whatever. This is a Guelph and a Wellington County issue. In fact, between 2019 and 2020, the beginning of the pandemic, hate crimes increased 80% in Guelph. And again, they've dropped. That's a pretty dramatic spike. 79% of our Black residents responded experiencing racism just in the previous 3 years. Now, 53% of those said that discrimination was clearly based on their race or skin color, and 32% said it was based on their ethnicity. And you can go into that report if you want. It's easy to Google and find if you want a breakdown of like how they knew it was your skin color or your ethnicity. When they talked about what is the types of discrimination they had, 2/3 said it was inappropriate jokes. So like a black man and a yellow man and a white guy walk into a bar, or it was derogatory language. 40% said it was verbal abuse. 20%, 1 in 5 said it was a verbal threat. All the way down to 5%, 1 in 20 said it was actual physical abuse, that they were physically harmed. And again, I just want to stress, this is here. This is not broadly or in an abstract other place. This is here in Guelph. In terms of our own school board, 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, we did our first ever student census. We just completed our second one last year, and the reports are going to be coming out this year. So I'm using the data from 2 years ago. It was not the one 2 years ago heavily skewed towards high school students in terms of our response rates. So I take that into account. But of the respondents that we did have, 81% were born in Canada. Almost 40% of our students self-identified as, not as white. That's a big shift. And I know that if you've been in our school board for a long time, that yeah, the demographics have changed. Well, as people have changed, we've had more people, and those people are experiencing discrimination. An increasing number of our students have lived experience of discrimination and racism. Over half of the students who completed it self-identified as having at least one form of a disability, whether it was physical, mental, emotional, or an addiction. Again, going back to the 2022 student census, when we asked, what is your ethnic or cultural origins, you were allowed to multi-select. Now, Canadian was the top, but it was only 1 in 5. 80% of our students did not say that they were Canadian as one of their origins or as their starting points. Not a surprise, perhaps. Italian, English, Irish, Scottish, and German were the biggest ones. However, that is changing, and there's more and more students are coming from all over the world. When we ask what is the racial category to best describe you, again, 62% said white. 38% described some other group. The largest single group outside of white was East Asian, followed by Black students, and then Latino. And then if you add in all the other groups together, it was about 14%. Another piece of context is the legal and professional context. So in 2019, Bill 48 put out that remarks or behaviors that expose persons or groups to hatred are grounds for professional misconduct. Now, that doesn't mean that we could be racist or horrible or sexist before that, but it does mean that if we were fired, it was for kind of not directly that. It was for some other aspect of it. But as of 2019, that was now grounds for professional misconduct. 2 years later, in December of 2021, the Ontario College of Teachers extended that to not just direct comments and actions by a teacher, but to include our responsibility for the texts we use, the comments we have, the course activities, even the discussions we allow students to have in class, that those can also now be grounds for professional misconduct. It explicitly says what I might potentially consider well-intentioned or well-meaning may not be experienced by my students or my colleague or their parents or a community member. And that's what matters, is how are they experiencing what we do? So with that, they added to and expanded the standards of practice to include and expect competency around principles of equity, diversity, inclusion, and anti-racism. And that failing to develop those competencies, to explicitly kind of refuse or to avoid it, that can be grounds for professional misconduct. And that's why we're bringing this to your attention. Like, I don't want that for any of you. I don't want our students to experience it. I don't want you to experience it. We want you to understand that this really does matter and it's part of our job and our profession. That this now includes self-reflecting on our own power, privilege, and position, which we're going to get to in a moment, and conscious bias and the learning environment as a whole. And it explicitly rules out us arguing that I was impartial or I'm tolerant or I'm a nice guy. That's not enough. That it actually is the results, is the environment that we have in our classroom inclusive and anti-oppressive. I'll pause there for a moment. Are there any questions?
Someone's got their hand up, Jeff.
Yeah, okay, so just unmute and ask your question, please.
Morning, Jeff. It's Ishal.
Oh.
I was just wondering, given how important this information is, if it's also being shared with parents and students sort of explicitly.
It is, well, not directly by us. I mean, we haven't had parent seminars on it yet, but it is part, like informing why we're doing the student census, for example, with the questions about like, what are your experiences within our system and so on. And it is certainly provincially, the province has been, kind of emphasizing that this is the direction. College of Teachers has been saying like, this is part of the where it is. Students are aware of it. Students know that there's an expectation for how their teachers are to treat them and what the teachers should know. And so, uh, although I haven't made presentations to students saying, "Hey, here's what you should, here's the bar," so to speak, students are aware of it, and they are increasingly expecting teachers to meet that bar. So there is a general awareness, and they're sharing with each other. Students are talking to each other like, "Oh, what was it like in Mr. Warner's class? Oh, this is what I experienced. Hey, that's cool, or that's not okay." And so that is coming out more and more.
And I had one quick question for Mary, and this is sort of all the way back to the language slide that you showed us at the beginning, around the racialized expression. So first of all, I just want to understand that are we discouraged from using the term racialized? Would it be better to use something like, I think I've heard somebody use the term equity seeking?
So racialized is the term that
Is
the
the
Black
term-
community is saying to be used now.
Oh, okay.
So before it was BIPOC. So 3 years ago, we were on BIPOC, which was Black, Indigenous, people of color. Of recent now, they're saying racialized is the term we should use. But remember, like I said, the best person to ask is the person you're dealing with as to how they want to be referred to. So like someone, like I know some of my friends like racialized, some of my friends don't like racialized. So it's just better to say Black, or if you know their ethnicity or who they are, that's how you describe them or refer to them.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, I think it's me again. So this is the part of the presentation in true social work fashion where I tell everyone to take a deep breath. Take a deep breath, breathe in, breathe out, because I know when we start talking about professional misconduct, people get nervous. So we're not trying to get anyone fired. No one's gonna get fired. You're all gonna do great because you're gonna take this information and you're gonna do great things with it. I think, like anything else in our society, when there's legal ramifications and when there's professional conduct, people tend to sit up and do better. And I think even for like me as a parent, when I saw that, I was happy. I said, okay, so now teachers are going to be held accountable because, I have kiddos in school too. And I think back to when I started school, that accountability wasn't there. Teachers could do whatever they wanted. Not saying every teacher did, but they could do anything they wanted. So it was nice to see, society like actually starting to hold teachers accountable. So like anything, like I'm a social worker, I'm with a college of social workers. I have code of ethics that I have to adhere to. I think it's those things that it's good to have so that it holds us accountable and we're doing the right thing in our profession and in our line of work. All right. So we're gonna move to the power wheel. So I think this was part of the handouts that was going to be given. If you don't have it, I hope you can see it on the slide here. So I'm sure we're all kind of familiar with some version of this power wheel. There are different versions out there, but this is the one we choose to use within our board. So we're going to do a little exercise with it. If we were in a room, then we would kind of all go into groups right now and have a conversation. But because we're virtual, it's a little different. So what we're going to ask you to do, and I think we're just going to use about five or 10 minutes on this. We're going to ask you to take a moment to locate yourself on the wheel. So find yourself on the wheel. So if you're not familiar with a power wheel, you just kind of go each slice of pizza and you find where you fit in the slice of pizza type of thing. If you look at it as a pizza. Um, so what aspect of your identity? Oh, sorry. So do that, and then take the time to consider what aspect of your identity has been rewarding, what aspect of it has been challenging, and what aspect of it has been held against you in some way. So take a few minutes to look at it, jot those down, and then we'll come back in about 3 minutes, Jeff? 2 minutes? Okay. We'll come back in about 2 minutes and then we'll take a couple of people who would like to share like where they found themselves and answer some of those questions. So yeah, go. All right. I think we're at 2 minutes. Um, yeah. Okay. So do we have any takers? Anyone want to share where they found themselves and answer some of those questions? Martin, I see your hand up. We can't hear you, Martin, if you're speaking.
I'm
There
just
you
not
are.
this Teams. I wasn't used to it. I mean, for me, the things well, basically on this power wheel, notice that pretty much I'm in that center circle, right?
Mm.
So I was probably white, pro-secondary, all that kind of stuff. But then there's times when I wasn't in that circle, or my nationality. So when I was first came to Canada as a landed immigrant and non-citizen, then
Mhm.
every time I went to the US, my wife and my children were let through, and then I was put off in a cage to the side, and was held up at the border for 2 hours and then basically interrogated and treated very differently than the rest of my
Mhm.
family. So that was, and then when I gained Canadian citizenship years later, then the whole relationship to that changed. The other is also kind of like what the British have kind of, as far as colonization across the world. Um, there's a lot of hatred towards British people, especially visiting parts of Southern Ireland as well. As soon as I realized that I was an Englishman, then I was physically attacked and different things that went on. And that was many years ago. I mean, there was a lot more animosity then. I mean, it still is now, but yeah. So nationality and also my citizen status.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing, Martin. Okay. Anyone else?
I'll go.
Jeff?
Sure.
Sure.
No, and thank you, Martin, for sharing. Like you, I'm kind of like at the center, and and I'll be very upfront. Like when I first heard about power, positionality, privilege, I really I actually got my back up. It kind of bugged me because as like I didn't see or really think that this was something that was fair. I didn't choose to be a guy or white. I didn't choose to, be born here or have the parents that did or anything like that. And I certainly, it's not like my life was hassle-free or without challenges. Like I worked hard and I was doing things. And so it kind of bugged me to think that somehow I was like getting a free ride or something like that. Like all these, I was defensive. Uh, and yet, probably what I didn't know and I recognize now is how much of my life I still had to work hard and I still encountered difficulties, but a lot of my life I didn't encounter the problems other people had who had different challenges. Um,
Mhm.
so probably as an example, and I share this, right? Um, at university, go out with my friends, I could stay out late at the bars, drink what I wanted to, and I could walk home alone at 2 a.m. And my concern walking home alone at 2 a.m. as a white man is like getting up in the morning and maybe tripping over a curb. That would be my concern. I've never known a woman ever in my life who'd said that that would be their main concern if they had to walk home alone 2 a.m. from the bar. The fact that I don't have to worry about those things is a piece of privilege as a male. Everyone should have that safety, but not everyone does. And I was unaware of how unsafe other people felt. And it doesn't matter how often it happens, the fact that it can happen at all means that everyone who's not male has a heightened sense of safety in a way that I don't have. I have children. Uh, they leave the house, they go to the mall, if they're driving, I don't have to worry how they're going to be treated based on their skin color. I worry maybe that they're going to be jerks or they're going to get into trouble, but not trouble as a default because of their identity. And that's when we start talking about like, oh, those are things that I don't have to deal with that other people do. I still have to deal with all kinds of stuff, money issues, health issues, stuff like that. But I don't have to deal with those other aspects of my identity that make it more difficult. And that's really what we're talking about. I'll be honest, growing up, didn't have a sense of pride or identity, or I didn't think of like, oh, this is my identity. It was just because it was so centered in everything around me that it was just how things were for the most part. And that's really how, when I started looking at this and thinking more and more, oh, yeah, there's a lot of aspects of it. One of those wedges is intentionally blank because there's so many aspects of our lives that are different. And context changes, right? If I went to a different country, maybe who I am would be the outlier. So, Martin generously as you shared, right? Like if you're in Britain and you're British, that's one thing. But if you're British and you're in Southern Ireland, that's a different thing, right? The context is different. And so really what we're talking about is what's the context in Guelph today?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Okay, let's go to the next one. Um, very quickly. I'm looking at our time and we want to
Yeah.
respect your time today. So now we want you to kind of take a moment to consider a student. So usually we do this with staff, so they already have students in their class. So we recognize that some of you might not have students yet, or maybe you have taught and you did have a class at one point. So take a moment to consider a student in one of your classes, and locate them on the wheel, and then also kind of think about what aspects of their identity may be rewarding, that might provide them a sense of self-worth, what might be challenging, and what might be held against them. And then lastly, how might their experience of education be different from yours? Um, so we'll give another 2 minutes for that, just to kind of think about that, and then we'll come right back again. All right, well, come on back. Okay. Does anyone want to share a student that they located and some of the thought processes with that? No? Okay. All right. So power and privilege is they're quite loaded, right? And Jeff already spoke a little bit about that, about how when you start to talk about privilege, people are like, "What do you mean? My life is hard. I don't have any privileges." But what we want to get across here is like what he said, those things that you don't have to worry about. Like sometimes when Jeff and I are talking, and I'm like, okay, and we talk about it, and he's like, oh, and I was like, yeah, so you like those things that you don't have to think about, that's a privilege for you because you don't have to consider. For example, we talk about like an example that he sometimes gives is like if his kid goes out and like is unruly, he doesn't have to worry, like if he has involvement with the cops, he doesn't have to worry that his kid won't come home. But that for me and for like my brothers who live in the US, that's a reality for us where when they're out, you act right. When the police, like you don't mess with police, and in Canada too. But that's a different reality, and that's the privilege that we're talking about. So we're not saying that people's lives are not hard. We're not in any way, diminishing the things that you've been through in your life. But when we talk about power and privilege, those are the pieces that we're talking um, about that. So, and it's always relative to the context in our society and for us also in a school system. So, as educators, you're going to carry a lot of power in school. Um, and like Martin shared, like in the society, depending on where you are, your power is kind of like dictated to you, and like okay, I have power because of this. An example that I like to give is one of my experiences in Canada. So it was when I look at the power wheel, technically by the standard of this wheel, I should have a lot of power. I'm educated, I'm able, I have a home, I have citizenship, my English is pretty clear. I'm a Christian. Like most of those things should give me power. But then I think about when I walk into the room, the minute people see me, most of that power is stripped away. They immediately go to a place of assuming that I don't speak English, assuming that I'm not well educated, assuming that like all these assumptions that come just from the way I look. The minute I walk into the room and they see a Black person, or they expect me to be aggressive, the aggressive Black woman, I can't really raise my voice because if I raise my voice, I must be aggressive because of the way that I look, right? So that, and then thinking about that when because we are talking about supporting the mental health needs of our Black students, when we're dealing specifically with our Black students, thinking about how they have to um, kind of make sense of that. Right now, I'm older now and wiser, I hope, and I can make sense of a lot of things that are happening when I am, in interactions with my colleagues or with whoever. But I think back to when I was younger and when I would be in like conversations with teachers or whatever, and I'm trying to make sense of what's happening, but I didn't have the words, I didn't have the processes then to kind of make sense of what I was feeling and why I was feeling that type of way. So also considering that when we're thinking about our Black students, because a lot of them, that is the reality that they're living in, of trying to understand all these pieces, like why am I being treated differently? But she did it too. Like, why didn't they yell at him? And they're trying to understand it. And in their little brain, they're trying to make sense of it. So how, like just being mindful of those pieces as well. What else about power and privilege? I think that's it. Any questions before I move to the next slide? No? Y'all are quiet. No questions. Okay. Okay, let's move to the next slide. So this is another handout that you should have that we like to share with staff. So overt versus covert racism. This comes from School Mental Health Ontario. Um, it's part of a larger document that you're also going to get at the end of this as well. So overt versus covert racism. So overt racism is there, like you see it, are the ones that we know that are like out there. We know they're racist. Somebody you're like, yeah, that's racism. Covert racism is the one that we usually spend some time on. So because some people are surprised as to the things that are considered covert. So if you can take a moment to look at the bottom of the iceberg. Oh, by the way, I forgot to say that. This is an iceberg. And as we all know, usually for an iceberg, you only see the top, but under is where the actual meat of the iceberg is. So if you can look at the bottom of the iceberg, and if there's anyone there that you're like, what is that? Or you have a question about it, you're like, I've never heard that, or you want us to explain or clarify, um, please feel free to ask.
Hi, sorry, quick question.
Yes.
I'm reading here and I'm seeing lynching. I'm not familiar with that term. What is that?
Do you want me to respond to that, or do you want to answer it, Mary?
No, I was looking at you.
uh, Lynching has an ugly history in North America. It's often associated with the US, but it's not. It has happened in Canada too. It is when community members come together and hang somebody in a symbolic fashion. So they kill them, they murder somebody. And so in the US, but also, again, I want to emphasize in Canada, there was a long period of time where lynching was relatively common, like multiple times in a year. Black men, sometimes Black women and Black children, or people who were Black friendly for whatever reason, were dragged out of their homes or their residences and murdered in a public sort of sense. And so we recognize, right, that as a racialized murder, like that's bad. It's overt racism. The legacy of that fear, however, is going to stick around, right? Like it's not, it doesn't go away very quickly.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Sarah, you have your hand up.
Hi, yeah, I was wondering about the phrase respectability politics. Could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. Again, that is a term that, you know, again, if it's new to you, it's new to you, and that's fine. It's okay, but it sometimes shows up. The idea that like, why are they so angry? Why are they doing this? Like, aren't they respectable? The idea that I'm not enforcing racialized standards, that instead I'm just asking people to be respectful. So Mary mentioned earlier that she has to be careful about, like all Black women have to watch the volume of their voice, because if they get excited, they get loud, they get angry, even if it's completely justified. Oh, you're the angry Black woman or whatever other blatant thing. And so people, it's like, you just need to be respectful. You know, if they talk to me respectfully, that would be fine. And so it gets used as a way of shutting people down from complaining. The reality is, people on the receiving end of racism and discrimination have been speaking up about it for a long, long time. It just often doesn't get anywhere, or it gets ignored, it doesn't get heard. And so when people start saying, look, I'm going to be much more aggressive, I'm going to be much more in your face about what I'm asking because I'm not getting it. And then usually the dominant culture will say, well, look, gotta be respectable here. Follow the system, trust the process, even if the process has never led you to a good place. That's what we're asking of you. Um, I hope that addresses it,
Yes,
helps
thanks very
explain that term.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks a lot.
And then Paul had a question in the chats and about tone policing. So that kind of goes in line with
Mhm.
the tone policing. So, and this goes way back. I remember this when I was in school too, where if I get together with my girls and we're loud and it's a problem, and then we're being told, lower your voice, but like other girls who are white or not Black are getting loud, and there's no issue with them raising their voice. But the minute we come together and we start to be loud, it's a problem. And, you know, when you dig into the studies and we like, as we've been learning about race, it's because when we get loud, people get nervous and they think something's going to happen. So it threatens their safety. And we know that now, but with the learning of like, why is tone policing, like, why are people concerned when people of color or are raising their voice or they're getting loud. And it goes back a little bit to the respect one that Jeff was talking about too, like just in the culture, in the society, like keep it monotone. And I remember even being in school, like I would literally have to check myself the minute I get to school, like, okay, lower your voice, don't get too excited, don't draw attention to yourself. Because for me doing that means something different. So that's where tone policing comes in. Does that answer that? Oh, yeah, he said thanks. Okay, never mind. Sharon, you've got your hand out. I can't see the left. Sharon Moody, you've got your hands up. On one hand. Are you there, Sharon? No? Okay. Any other questions? Any other ones? All right. Next slide, please, sir. Okay, so now we are going to, so in that covert iceberg that you just saw, one of the ones that was there was microaggressions. So microaggressions we're finding is what we are having to kind of address a lot and talk about a lot in the last few years. So we're going to watch a wonderful video by Dr. Gerald Wing Su about it, and then we'll come back and talk on what you heard and what you took away.
Tonight, we bring you another conversation in our series, Race Matters Solutions, during a week when racial tensions on campus have led to protests and high-profile resignations. Special correspondent Charlene Hunter-Gault sat down with Columbia University Teachers College professor Daryl Su to learn more about the small slights that some say are more insidious than the overt racial tensions that could be seen and observed by all. Here's that conversation.
Professor Su, thank you for joining us. So tell me just what exactly is microaggression?
Well, microaggressions are varying from being conscious, deliberate on a continuum to being outside one's level of awareness and unintentional. Microaggressions really are reflections of worldviews of inclusion, exclusion, superiority, inferiority, and they come out in ways that are outside the level of conscious awareness of an individual. When I'm asked, where were you born? And I say, I was born in Portland, Oregon. And they persist by saying, no, 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 where were you really born? And I'll say, Portland, Oregon? And they'll say, no, what country were you born in? And I'll say, the United States. They get very embarrassed. Now, this is an example that they are intending to make a personal connection. But the hidden communication, the true worldview, is that I am a perpetual alien or foreigner in my country. I am not a true American, because true Americans only look the following way. And that's what generates these behaviors that are microaggressions.
But you describe it as unintentional, and yet we've seen at the University of Missouri very blatant examples of racism.
You're right about that. Microaggressions vary from being conscious, deliberate, intentional, from old-fashioned racism and bias statements to the unintended consequences. And our studies do indicate that it's the hidden, unintentional forms of bias that are most damaging to people of color. And that, like at the University of Missouri, where you have people being called racial epithets or behaviors that are going on, it actually is only the tip of the iceberg. The reason why I believe students of color, faculty of color, are reacting in such a major way is that they are experiencing a climate that is hostile, that is full of microaggressions. These hate incidents on campus are triggering off this discontent, pain, and feeling of being silenced.
But there are critics of your studies and the notion even of microaggression, which they say have morphed from 1970 when it was unintentional to now everything that happens, and that people are just being overly sensitive. They say if you coddle these students on campus, how does that prepare them to live in the real world?
You know, the problem is that people believe microaggressions are very similar to the everyday incivility and rudeness that individuals, white Americans, experience in their day-to-day lives. They are quite different. Microaggressions for people of color are constant, continual, and cumulative. They occur to people of color from the moment of birth to when they die. And as a result, any one microaggression in isolation may represent the feather that breaks the camel's back. And people who don't see the lived experience of people of color and the daily onslaught that they experience tend not to believe that it's a major event.
You know, there's another criticism because this has been called, some of the things that people are called, now they say the N-word and
Yes.
other things like that, is hate speech, and that it's protected by the First Amendment. So isn't that okay, given that kind of reasoning?
You know, and I think that people who say that we are preventing individuals from free speech don't realize, ironically, that it is people of color that historically have not been able to express themselves openly or freely without punitive actions being directed at them. And so there has to be this balance, but at the same time an understanding that there are limits to free speech when it harms and hurts people.
Why do you think that students commit microaggressions, or adults for that matter?
You know, that's a good question, and I think it goes to the heart of the matter, that none of us are immune from inheriting the racial biases of our forebears. We have, you know, attitudes and biases that are delivered through microaggressions.
But when some of these microaggressions come out in the form of real hatred, is that solvable?
We can deal with that deliberately, but the subtle forms of microaggressions are hard to prove, hard to quantify in some way, and very difficult for us to take actions against, because people oftentimes don't perceive it as harmful and significant. You know, people oftentimes tell me that white Americans are the enemy. I say, no, white Americans aren't the enemy. White supremacy is. It's the social conditioning of the superiority of one group over another. And many white Americans are equally victimized because they have been socialized into a society that tends to imbue them with these images that they believe in, but it's no fault of their own. If you really reach white Americans, they can become valuable allies. One of the reasons why our research concentrates on the unintentional forms of microaggressions is very much what Maya Angelou said. It's the unintentional bias that does the greatest harm to people of color. And I oftentimes use the example that, you know, when you look at the disparities and inequities we have in education, employment, and healthcare, it is not due to the overt racists or the white supremacists. It is due to the well-intentioned teachers who educate our children, employers who decide who to hire, who to retain, and who to promote. And it is those individuals who are unaware of their hidden biases that are having the major impact on our standard of living.
Well, Professor Sue, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you.
And you can find more about
So as we go, some just examples of what it can look like in our schools. And then when you look at it in a broader context, these are all headlines from Southern Ontario, mostly in our region, just in the past couple of years. It's always a context. It's always a pattern. And it is an aspect of my personal privilege and identity that I can forget that because it's not necessarily part of my pattern or my identity. And that's the challenge.
Jeff, you're on mute.
Jeff, you're muted.
Thank you for pointing that out. I apologize. Sorry. So we don't teach in a vacuum. It is part of my identity that I get to kind of ignore that vacuum, or I get to ignore that context if I wish. But those who experience it, who live it, that you can't put it aside. You can't just pretend to be unaware of what can happen. When we go into a classroom, whether it's an occasional teacher or however the context is, right? We're hoping that the students are going to trust me. They're going to respect who I am and my authority. Trust, though, is based on what's happened before, and that includes the entirety of their life and their life experiences. And every person is impacted by what's going on. If I've had a class at a school that's been really unruly and rough, it's going to affect the next class I go to teach at the same school. Well, the same thing is that our students, I walk in, I think it's a blank slate. It's the first time I'm meeting them, but it's not the first time they've met someone who looks and sounds like me. And that's what their trust is going to be based on. And the reality is that every Black, Indigenous, or racialized family, uh, they've experienced colonization. They've experienced a racist, colonized education system designed by people who look like me, primarily for the benefit of people who look like me. And they live in a society that centers whiteness. And as we've mentioned before, they have to consider safety in a way that's different from white families. And I know that Peanuts comics are very dated. And I apologize if you don't know them at all. But the running joke in Peanuts is Lucy keeps holding up the football and says, "Okay, this time, Charlie Brown, I'm going to hold it for you." And Charlie Brown every time runs. And never once in the history of the comic strip does Lucy let him kick the ball. She always yanks it away at the last minute. He goes flying on his back. And the humor is entirely on like, why does he go every single time? Why should he trust her this time? And sometimes what we forget is that for some of our students and some of our families is how they feel about the education system and about white people. And that's not fair, perhaps, to me individually or you individually, but it is a reality. We have to just recognize what is the trust that I'm asking of them or assuming about them? And what is the trust that I can show them? How can I demonstrate that, you know what, I'm not gonna make their identity a problem. I'm not gonna hold it against them. In fact, I'm gonna celebrate who they are. You think about it in the context of a school. So something happens, you witness it perhaps between two students, and you're like, that seems a bit weird. My gut's telling me that that was bad. That was maybe there's some racial overtones or sexist overtones or whatever. And it's an awkward moment. And the person who did it You know, whatever they said or did intentionally or not, maybe they're feeling anxious about, like, if you call them out on it, they're going to lose status in their social esteem. They're going to be shamed. They're going to minimize what happens. Maybe they're going to get defensive, right? Uh, the person who they did it to, um, they might be saying, "Oh my God, this is just like every other time I've been in this class. This is the 50th time that this kid has done this, or whatever the context is. Or maybe it's the first time, but it's bringing everything back. Maybe they're afraid of making it worse. If I say something, it's just going to get worse. If I stand up for myself, it's going to get worse." And maybe you or somebody else who's witnessed it are like, did I see that? Like, if I say something, am I making it an issue? Maybe maybe it wasn't so bad.
Absorb what many assignments are.
Sorry? I didn't quite catch that.
It wasn't for you, Jeff. Keep going.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Sorry. And so it can be a situation, right? Like something happens and everyone now feels awkward, right? And so it becomes really easy to let it pass. It's really easy just to, okay, let it go. But we're going to ask you very clearly, don't let it go. Because if you let it go, two messages get sent out. The person who on the receiving end, their feelings don't matter. Maybe, in fact, it's their fault. Like it's only a microaggression if you're upset about it. Otherwise, it's a joke. So now it's their fault for what the other person did or said. And everybody else is given the implied permission that in nothing else, that didn't meet the bar for getting you into trouble, that bar is okay. It's always better to say something, even if you don't know what to say. Just, hey, that sounded awkward. I'm not comfortable with that. That matters. Kids are going to say, look, I didn't mean it. I didn't intend it. You're like, okay, great. I never would question someone's intentions. Intentions matter. And I don't know your intentions, but the impact matters more. And the analogy I will draw is if someone hits my car and they get out and they're like, oh my gosh, and they tell me every reason they didn't see me, they were rushing, they had a busy day. Oh my gosh, the kid was in the back seat doing that. They got every reason why it wasn't their fault. But they still hit my car. Can we acknowledge the fact that they hit my car and maybe that's what they don't want to do? That's probably more important right now. Oh, my bad. I am sorry. And that's really critical to the acknowledgement of like, no, that's not okay. And that is something that all of you can do. One of the handouts that's gone out is some suggested ways to interrupt certain kinds of microaggressions, to recognize some of them. And again, we don't have the time to go into the depth about all of them. It will be awkward. You won't know what to say. And it's still better to say something, even if you don't know what to say. And I don't know if
Jeff,
there's any questions, or Mary, if you want to chime in on that.
no, you did good. Sharon Moody's got her hand up.
Yes, I think you answered the question when you mentioned that I was going to ask a respectful way to not make it bigger than it is, but to get the principals involved, and not make a big deal about it. But because kids just love to gather around and look at the whatever's going on, and how to do that in a respectable way for the person that has been hurt. And the other one, as you mentioned, will come up with 1,000 excuses, and probably they've had those 1,000 excuses forever. They just enjoy it. And I just don't know how to not make it go beyond that small circle of how to actually do it. If you're the adult in the group, how do you make them see each other?
So it might be impossible in the moment to make them see each other. What is possible, however, to say is, hey, what I overheard bothers me. I don't know what you thought you meant. I don't need to know what you meant. I want you to know that I heard it and I'm uncomfortable because I'm just uncomfortable with the implications. Well, sir, what implications? I don't know. It sounded like there was some racial overtones to it. Oh my gosh, sir, there wasn't. Oh, good, good. So you're never going to say that again, right? Um, like it can be is just as direct as I heard that, And we don't speak that way here. That's not okay. Why, sir? I'm happy to have a conversation with you outside if you like. I just want to draw your attention to like, I'm not comfortable with that. And sometimes that's gonna be enough. Now, if it's ongoing, the kid does it again, that's a different issue, right? Like now we're in a totally different era of like how to interact and you know and respond to it. But initially, hey, I'm uncomfortable. Me, the teacher in the room, the authority, I am uncomfortable with what you just said and how it said. The kid is on the receiving end may comment later, hey, miss or mister, you know, like I'm okay with it. Great, I'm glad to hear it. I don't want to hear it. And you make it about you, that takes the burden off the student and it takes it away from the other kid, but it calls attention to the incident.
Yeah. And I think what I would add to that is it's also dependent on how it's happening. So if it's happening in a group, you want to address it in the group. So similar, like for example, what Jeff said, you're also sending a message to the other kids that are there. So if a kid is saying something that is inappropriate in a group setting, then the foundation or the standard needs to be set immediately that we do not say that word here. That's not appropriate. It's not nice, whatever language you want to use. Then if you want to then pull the kid aside and have a more in-depth conversation with them without all eyes watching, then you can also do it that way. But you want to make sure you're addressing it right then and there, because again, it's about the impact. For example, they just hit the car. We're not going to go to the side and talk about the car you just hit. We're going to talk about it right now. Where's your insurance? Let's fix my car. So I think always remembering that even if you're moving it away, it's also still saying, oh, it's okay to say it, let's just go talk about it, versus that's not appropriate, we don't use that kind of language here, come see me, we're going to talk about it. So then they're clear it's not okay, and the impact for the other students is, oh, don't talk like that. So it covers all those pieces as well. Ishel, you have your hand up. Did I say your name right?
Yes, you did, Mary. Thank you
Right.
for asking. That's okay. I'm going to just sort of jump to I suppose, in some situations, an elephant in a room, which is going to be asking a question around the use of the N word. I am wondering if our board has a policy, if that would, if we can know where that is, and if things that I have heard are accurate, in that it is not to be used by people who are not Black, who don't identify as Black. I was just wondering if someone could speak to, again, as occasional teachers and maybe student supervisors, like, I don't know how to comfortably address that if without prejudging a student on an instance observation as to whether they are justified and identified, like, you know what I mean?
Yes, I
So
know what you mean.
Michelle, oh sorry, I didn't
Yeah.
mean to cut you off, Mary.
That's okay.
That's
So
okay. Go ahead, Joe.
no, Mary, you go.
Okay, so we were probably going to say the same thing. There is a policy. We do have an N-word guidelines for our staff. And it's something that we've kind of been working on and updating for the last 3 years. So that is going to be shared with you. And it does answer some of those questions and wonderings that you have, Ishel, about how do we address it? What do we do? I think the general message is that it's not a word we use in our schools. Um, but then there's also the nuances of policing like Black students when they use it and the context in which it is being used. Either way, it's not a word we use in our schools. If you want to go outside with your buddies and use that word as Black students, that's your prerogative. But we don't use those words in any of our schools. Just like we don't use the F word and we don't use any other derogatory words. We do not. But that document kind of goes over that and goes over how we might address it, what are the disciplinary actions and things like that.
The only thing to add to that is in any context, if you're in a classroom, use your head. Like if it's a racialized or sexist or offensive term, don't say it. Even if the teacher's written in their lesson plan in big bold letters, please say these words out loud. Don't. You're the adult in the room. Just don't use them. As Mary said, we are sharing the guidelines with you as part of this.
Sorry, Jeff, I
I
missed
recognize
it.
there's going to be a lot of questions, and that's why we have the forum, but I also recognize that I've taken more time than Deb wanted me to. So I'm just going to kind of move a little bit. This is in the handouts you're going to get. This is a very quick summary of some thoughts. Avoid us versus them mentality if you can, because the reality is the more you're afraid walking into the classroom, the more you're going to overreact to stuff. And that's a problem in of itself. Don't make assumptions about who people are, invite conversations. As I just said, don't write, defend, explain a slur, right? Just skip it over, leave it blank. I'm not going to say those words. Watch for over policing of a group. Just be aware of why you're calling attention to a behavior and call the attention to the behavior, not to the kids. So, hey, this is really loud. It's being disruptive as opposed to you kids are being loud. When, not if, and you make an error. I make errors all the time, as Mary will tell you. Own it, right? Being defensive isn't so great. On the other hand, just saying, oh, I'm really sorry. I'm going to do better. Thanks for letting me know. Mistakes are how we learn. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. And we're going to speak
Jeff,
to that in this.
sorry, can you go back one slide? So very, very quickly, and if we had time, we would kind of dive into this a little bit. So the School Mental Health Ontario Guide is a great resource. So, we come in, we have this conversation, and, we have a lot of teachers saying, now what do I do now that you've given me all these things? So this is a great document that you want to spend a lot of time on, because a lot of these things that we're talking about, I think it sets the stage, it sets the context. It talks about how you want to set your classroom, how you want to be going into the classroom. And it literally gives you like examples of what you can do. And then within documents, there are links that you can click to kind of learn further on how this work might be a little bit easier for you as you go into your classrooms. Yeah, so I just wanted to quickly say that.
So, yeah, these are the handouts, by the way, that you're going to get. There's a lot, and they're on the portal. You can email myself or Mary afterwards if you need to, and we'll get them to you. I'm going to show you just a 1-minute video clip. This is from Dufferin Peel. Peel, Region of Peel, and it is a student just talking about why it matters in terms of how hard it can be.
It's back!
Ford employee pricing is on now.
Where you pay what we pay.
When you can get my price on this Bronco Sport.
Or this Bronco.
What's not to love? It's here now, but not for long.
Ford employee pricing is back.
It's the highlight of the summer.
When you get my price on this F-150,
what's not to love? Ford employee pricing, you pay what we pay.
I really agree with what you said. In the end, the whole thing with schools, it's supposed to be a safe space to learn and to grow. And for Black students, it's not like, it doesn't feel safe. It feels like another challenge we have to overcome. Getting up every day, like getting on the bus and ignoring what people say. And then you go to class and you need to ignore what the teacher says, but you also need to like take in the important stuff for class. And you need to go to lunch and ignore all the slurs you hear in the hallway, as you said. And it's so taxing emotionally. And at one point, like, it doesn't even feel like an extra weight because you're so used to experiencing it in a way that you don't know that it's supposed to be any different. And I don't really want that for like people like my sisters. I don't want them to have to go through that. I don't want them to get used to this. Yeah.
That's what
microaggression. Understand what you're going.
All right, so don't say nothing. This is in the document that we referred to earlier, from School Mental Health Ontario. That's where you'll find this poem by Jamila Pitts. And we just like to highlight this for teachers because, again, we understand that this is a lot of information. So it says, students pay attention to everything we say and do. They particularly pay attention to our silence. Many Black and Brown students are educated in school systems and classrooms where they, despite making up the racial majority, are taught how to understand the world by a staff comprised of a powerful minority. So if you feel that the conversation is too heavy or that the weight of having to end racism is in your lesson plan, humble yourself and relax. It isn't. Your students need you to allow them space, not to fix the world. And in the words of the beautiful late Dr. Maya Angelou, do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, you do better. Thank you all so much for your time today.
Thank you. If you have a moment to scan that QR code with your phones, you can give us anonymous feedback. We don't record your name or email address in there, and you can put questions in, which we will compile into a follow-up email for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jeff and Mary. Thanks for sharing your knowledge with us on this topic. I hope that everybody walked away with feeling inspired to increase the equity and diversity ways of thinking within our board. Everybody is thanking you. I don't know, Jeff, if you were able to end up being able to see the chat, but there's lots of thank yous there. So to everybody else, this concludes the presentation. You are welcome to start your health and safety training on safe schools. You were also sent a link to that earlier. The HR team is now present. So if anybody did want to stay, this ends the paid part of the presentation. But if anyone had any quick questions for us that they'd like us to answer in terms of anything else related to HR, we are here and you're welcome to stay on the presentation. We are going to end the recording now. And that would be it.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks.